There we go. Welcome to another session of Old Testament Survey. We're all the way up to session number 33, and today we'll be introducing the wisdom literature. The wisdom literature is Proverbs, the book of Ecclesiastes, and the Song of Solomon. Sometimes we also include Job in the wisdom literature, but for our purposes today, we're going to look at these three that all date more or less to the same time. Solomon was famous for wisdom, and these three books are all more or less happening during the time of Solomon. We can't say exactly that Solomon is for sure the author of all three, but he supervised the collection and the writing of the three. As Solomon is a main character in at least Ecclesiastes and the Song of Solomon. So Solomon is the guy, and wisdom is the key idea here. Wisdom is an interesting thing in that it is not specifically religious. Religion is involved, and a belief in God is an important part of wisdom. But the wisdom literature is very practical, very down-to-earth stuff. Wisdom in the Bible is usually defined as looking at life from God's point of view, or developing an understanding of God's word, God's revelation, to such an extent that it can have a practical application in life. And so the wisdom literature will tell us things like work hard, don't be slothful, rejoice in the wife of your youth, raise your children with her, and live together throughout your lives. It will tell you to guard your tongue, to be slow to speak and even slower to anger. The wisdom literature is not specifically for use in the temple or in the sacrificial system. We don't even really hear much about that. It's more for how to live, how to work, how to enjoy relationships, how to avoid trouble. If you want to avoid poverty, work hard, be faithful, do what you're called on to do. When you make an agreement, keep to it. Stuff like that. And we see this developing in each of the three books in a somewhat different way. The Proverbs, let me share the screen for a little bit. I probably won't share the screen the whole time, but I'll show you this opening shot. The Proverbs are a collection of wise sayings, and in some cases extended instructions for living a useful life. It's a part of a much larger body of literature that exists throughout the ancient world, and we call this in general wisdom literature. The Babylonians had this, the Egyptians had this, the Hittites had wisdom literature, and there are quite a number of proverbs and other elements of the wisdom literature that find their parallels in the other parts of the ancient world, because wisdom works for everybody. If the non-believer can learn to look at life from God's point of view, he will live a more productive and happy life. He'll go to hell at the end of it, but he'll live a happier, more productive life. And that's what wisdom is about. Obviously, the beginning of wisdom is the fear of the Lord. So a completely wise life is impossible for the non-believer. But the elements of wisdom have their own reward. And that's why people who follow some non-Christian groups. Here in America, we have a large population of Mormons, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, Joseph Smith, and all of that. And they believe all kinds of really, really wrong things. But they try to live life in a wise way. And so they tend to have families that are strong. They get a good education, get good jobs, they take care of one another, they're good to children, they value a lot of virtually all of the same things that conservative Christians do. And they're not Christians, but they tend to be very nice people. And there's something to be said for that. Wisdom is all about that. The Proverbs take their root in this ancient Near Eastern common sense approach to life. The Proverbs specifically are characterized by short, pithy statements, usually 2 lines. We sometimes say a proverb is a short saying drawn from long experience. There are some things that they just don't have to be drug out. Like vinegar to the tongue and smoke to the eyes is the sluggard to the one who sends him. That just says it. And typically we like the way that works, and that's true for everybody. That particular proverb comes from Egypt, and it has its exact parallel in our Proverbs. Yeah. Okay. Wise living is kind of fundamental. It crosses cultural lines. It tends to be what in the modern world is called conservative. And so wisdom would say that there are only 2 kinds of people. There are boy-type people and girl-type people, because that's common sense. Modern progressive thinkers like to think outside of all of those boxes, and they do all kinds of crazy things with gender. But that's not common sense. It is also not wise. People who are really boys but pretend to be girls tend to not have happy and productive lives for all of the obvious reasons. At any rate, wisdom literature is like that. I'm going to stop sharing, and we're going to go through. This way, you can see my face while we're doing this thing. The authorship and date. Oh boy, I don't really want that to happen. Say tab. There we go. I'm still learning. After 6 months of doing this, I'm still learning how to use Zoom. You didn't see what just happened there, but it confused me. It's traditional that Solomon is the author of the collection. This is supported by internal evidence. Solomon was indeed a wise man, although he didn't always live by that wisdom. Modern scholars, conservative scholars, have adjusted the view a little bit. There are some outside the Solomonic box chapters in the Proverbs collection. We've got the work of Agur in chapter 30 and King Lemuel in chapter 31. And there are some proverbs that come from other countries. So we could say that Solomon's court took care of the collection. And Solomon may have written many of them. In Proverbs, we find a lot of little short sentences. A proverb is not hard to recognize. It's short. We sometimes say that a proverb is pregnant. That is, there's more in the proverb than meets the eye. You don't see the whole proverb with one quick reading. One little proverb is often applicable in many practical situations. So they're worth studying. They're kind of fun. Let's look at the kind of poetry that's used in the Proverbs. And here, let me go back to. I should be able to go back to. Okay. Should be able to share this. I want to share the screen. Yeah, sometimes it's a little difficult to do. Okay, this is a typical kind of parallelism. The parallelism in the Proverbs works about the same as the way the parallels work in the Psalms. So there's synonymous parallel. There is antithetic parallel. There's a but in the middle. And sometimes there's that synthetic one line built upon another kind of parallelism. Sometimes in longer passages, that's what we're going to see. But usually they're just two lines. So as vinegar to the teeth and smoke to the eyes, so is the sluggard to the one who sends him. So this is a comparison. That makes it a synthetic or a synonymous parallel. Just like vinegar to the teeth and smoke to the eyes. Do you like vinegar on your teeth? Well, no. How about smoke in your eyes? Well, even less. Well, so is the sluggard to the one who sends him. The sluggard is one of the characters that pops up in the Proverbs that we don't see elsewhere. The sluggard is the slow-moving fella. We usually visualize the sluggard as a guy, but I suppose there can be sluggards who are girls. Slow-moving, not very hard-working, tends to put things off until tomorrow, lets his roof sag, doesn't show up for work on time, so on and so forth. The sluggard takes his name from a small creature. I'm not sure if it's not a mammal, it's not an insect. What is a slug anyway?
It's kind of like a worm, just a minute.
Yeah, it kind of looks like a worm. It leaves a slime trail. Here in America, we have banana slugs that are, maybe 10 centimeters long, green with a yellow or whitish bottom, and they slime along the ground real slowly.
If it's any help, it's a gastropod mollusk.
A gastropod mollusk. Donna is so helpful. I don't have the foggiest idea what a gastropod mollusk is, but a slug is one of those. And they move very slowly. And they're not very nice to have around. A similar term is the term sloth. In Australia, there's an animal called the three-toed sloth. And his characteristic is that he moves very slowly, never gets anything done. We'll run into those a whole lot. And I actually won't spend very much time with my Old Testament or with my Proverbs today.
A slug is kind of a snail without a shell.
Okay, Donna now says a slug is a kind of snail without a shell.
Right.
Oh, if you put a shell on that guy, he'd be a
snail.
Okay, he'd be a snail.
It's a little more complex, but that's.
Yeah. Are they good to eat?
I haven't gotten that far.
Okay, Donna hasn't gotten that far. I'm going to quit the share for a moment. The Proverbs are didactic literature. That means they're designed for teaching. Best way to study the Proverbs, I think, is one at a time. Um, you take the one and milk it. Take all of the juice out of one individual proverb. Uh, the Proverbs are designed for moms and dads to teach their children about real life, actual principles for living. This is not a whole lot of philosophy. This is not a whole lot of theology. It's a whole lot of practical living. And the instructions are often given through imperatives, do this, or prohibitions, don't do that. Sometimes there are example stories. There are traits to be observed and to be avoided or to be imitated. The motivation for learning a trait is often included in the lesson. Go to the ant, you sluggard. Notice how he has no master beating him, but he lays aside his harvest for the winter. And that way, in the middle of the winter, he has plenty to eat. Would you like to have plenty to eat all winter long? Well, then work hard during the harvest season. It's very practical, and yet you can visualize the application of a story like that in all kinds of situations. You've got a 7-year-old boy who tends to dawdle while doing chores. Go to the ant, you sluggard. And, if these chores don't get done, can you see that your mother won't have time to make a decent lunch for you, and so you'll go hungry all day. It only works if you follow through on threats like that, but it's still, didactic literature is designed for teaching, and the motivation is often built right in. Let's see. The structure of the book is pretty simple, and it's actually no particular structure at all. Chapters 1 through 9 is introductory. There are some longer wisdom stories. Sometimes wisdom is personified as a woman. In New Testament times, we have the personification of Saint Sophia. Sophia is the Greek word for wisdom. In the church in Constantinople was named Holy Wisdom, or Hagia Sophia, and that's a personification of wisdom. It's not a bad thing. There are stories of the father teaching his son, the mother teaching her children. That's the first 9 chapters. Chapters 10 through 22 is a collection of, get ready for it, 375 unrelated proverbs. They are collected together for no reason that any of us can figure out. There they are, 375 of them. And they're in no particular order. The themes are all mixed up. And so it's 375 of them. For this reason, it's a little difficult to study that. How do you study that? The best way is one proverb at a time. I just spend long enough with it to enjoy it. Chapters 22, 3, and 4 is a collection that is patterned after something that is called the instruction. We don't have a copy of the instruction, so all we have left is this 3 chapters of Proverbs. It's just another collection of unrelated proverbs, except for the other. Chapters 25 through 29 is yet another collection of unrelated proverbs. Okay. Well, so basically from chapters 10 through 29 is a whole bunch of unrelated proverbs. We've got about 500 of them in there. And uh, they, they all have their own individual value, but they don't follow any particular theme. Chapter 30 is the sayings of a wise man by the name of Agur, about whom we know nothing except what's in this chapter. These are his sayings, and some of them are numerical. He uh, uh, uses numbers in kind of odd ways. Chapter 31 is an acrostic. That means it begins with letters of the Hebrew alphabet. And this is written by somebody called King Lemuel, of whom we have no knowledge. But the picture in chapter 31 is one of the great pictures in the whole Bible of the godly wife. It's a picture that I believe every young woman ought to be introduced to early in her life. Every young man ought to be introduced to this as the kind of girl that your mom and dad would be really, really happy if you dragged home sometime. This is the picture of the ideal. So anyway, that's what Proverbs is about. There's some other stuff going on here. I'll talk just briefly about the theological values in Proverbs. This is not exclusively a religious book, as I mentioned before. The concerns are not of value merely in a religious setting, in the temple or a prayer group, for example. The Proverbs are of value in every practical area of life. There's no big theological issues in the Proverbs. This is not the book that we go to demonstrate the Trinity or to expound the components of salvation. We go elsewhere for that. This author concerns himself with plain, ordinary people who live in a very practical world. They deal with common issues of their life with either folly or wisdom. There are several characteristics that we see all the way through the book. One is that there is a focus in the Proverbs on the individual. The individual is responsible for himself and for his immediate family. The book sets out qualities that are needed and dangers that are to be avoided by people who are seeking to walk with God. And this is almost entirely on an individual level. This runs counter to some of the emphases that we see elsewhere in Scripture of the importance of the community. The Proverbs would not deny the importance of the community, but rather put an emphasis on the importance of the individual decisions that we make, whether foolish or wise, and what happens when we do those things. Because of the nature of Proverbs wisdom, these Proverbs are applicable to everybody, everywhere, every culture. I'll read some examples here in just a moment that I just happened to mark down, but they're applicable everywhere. We never run out of places to use them. They work in every age, every part of history. The Proverbs are as meaningful for us today as they were to Solomon. And every culture will see the value of the Proverbs' wisdom. In what culture is it more practical to be slothful than to work hard? In what cultural area is it wiser to waste your time and money and energy on foolishness rather than working hard, raising a family, and building order in your community? That these things are true everywhere, and foolishness tends to be universal. It has specific applications, but it tends to be universal. And by the same token, wisdom tends to be a universal thing. Okay, the Proverbs are based on a respect for authority, for traditional values, and for the teachings of mature, wise teachers. And that's why we old, wise teachers particularly like Proverbs, because I read the Proverbs and I say to myself, I've been teaching that for 50 years. This is what I've been telling kids forever and ever. It's obviously right. Now, young people often rebel against the Proverbs ideal because they believe that they can find a better way to do things. But the older you get, the more you realize there aren't usually any better ways to do things than the traditional approach. So marrying one woman, staying married, raising your children with her, and growing old together is a very stick-in-the-mud, conservative, old-fashioned, traditional way of doing things. And yet, people who do that end up saving more money over a lifetime. They live a more productive life in general. Their children are better set up for life. Their children tend not to do crime. Their children tend not to do drugs. Why is that? Why is all of this true? Because wise living just works better. And modern liberals and non-Christians, which is much the same thing, always think that they can do it a better way. We can have this free love and free lunch and government supply everything kind of an economy, and everybody will be happy, but it never works out. And the reason it doesn't work out is that it runs counter to common sense and God-given foundational ideas. So the Proverbs are immensely practical. They give sound advice and good warnings. It would be wrong to conclude that Proverbs is a secular book, though. Its teachings are founded on the first principle, which is the fear of the Lord. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. That idea, all by itself, that idea of the fear of the Lord is what philosophers would call a grand unifying theory. It's a first principle upon which all other principles can be built. And in that sense, the Proverbs is built on actually very deep, very sophisticated philosophy. The book of Ecclesiastes, which we'll get to next, lays out much of the theoretical basis that the Proverbs are built on. And the Proverbs are built on this one idea. We begin with the fear of the Lord. There is a God in heaven. I am not him. He has laid down the principles by which all of life will be judged and by which all blessing will be distributed. Those principles are not negotiable. Those principles are not changeable. Sometimes we call this common sense. Sometimes we call this wisdom. Sometimes we call this natural law. These things are universally true because God is the ground of existence and the foundation of all truth. So without God, none of the rest of it would make any difference at all. Without God, at the center of it all, the non-Christians who seem to live such productive lives would not be able to do that. They ignore him and hate him to their loss. And yet those few things that they do that are conservative and wise result in good lives for them. Okay, I want to share just a few things from the Proverbs, because I like the Proverbs, I really do. And, we'll start out in chapter 1 at verse 20. Wisdom cries aloud in the street. In the markets, she raises her voice. Here's this personification. Wisdom as a person of the female persuasion. Wisdom cries out in the street. In the market, she raises her voice. At the head of the noisy street, she calls out. At the entrance to the city gates, she speaks. How long, O simple ones, will you love being simple? How long will scoffers delight in their scoffing and fools hate knowledge? There are three characters in that passage: the simple, the scoffer, and the fool. I actually put them in this order. The simple is at one end of the spectrum. The simple, sometimes called the naive, is the character who is young, inexperienced, untaught, and has never really thought much about anything. He's busy having fun, and so he's young and naive and stupid. And if you teach a simple man, a naive youngster, he will learn. That's the promise. He can be molded. The scoffer is at the other end of my spectrum. The scoffer is the individual who has got enough education one way or another and has thought deeply, he thinks, about matters philosophical and theological, and he has come up with a logical argument against God, that it should be possible to live life, according to the scoffer, without ever bothering with God. So the scoffer is the theoretical atheist. In America, we have a number of very famous theoretical atheists. Carl Sagan is a great example. He's dead now, so he knows better. But he used to do a TV show called Cosmos. Cosmos is the universe. Now, he used to get out on the stage for the TV show, and he would say the cosmos is all that is, all that was, and all that ever shall be. He was your classical atheist, going about teaching that science demonstrates that there is no God. That's what the show was all about. It was very popular for a long time. Isaac Asimov, a famous science fiction writer, is a scoffer. All of his stories were about how there is no God. Many famous philosophers, Bertrand Russell, why I am not a Christian. A stupid argument, actually a very, what we would call sophomoric argument for the non-existence of God. Those people will discover at the end of their lives that they have chosen poorly. And God will have no mercy, because they have led generations of young people astray. The fool is the character in the middle. If the naive is at one end, he can be taught. The scoffer is at the other end. And the book of Proverbs says, don't bother arguing with the scoffer. You can't change him, you can't bend him, you can't break him. He's on his way to perdition, and there's no hope for him. Now, perhaps we could eventually get through to some of them, but in general, it's not worth the effort. This is a Proverbs attitude. The character in the middle is the fool. The fool says in his heart, there is no God. but he can be broken. He can be faced with the truth. He can be worked with. The proverb speaks of the fool as one who can respond to chastisement. So a father who has a fool for a son needs to, one way or another, break him and then rebuild him. It's a tough job. And it means that education has failed up to that point. Yeah. Okay. Let's go over to chapter, oh, there's so many things in the Proverbs. 3:1. My son, do not forget my teaching, but let your heart keep my commandments, for length of days and years of life and peace they will add to you. Who wouldn't want live long and prosper? That's kind of that's a Star Trek answer. That is good. Six. Go to the ant, O sluggard, consider her ways and be wise. Without having a chief officer or ruler, she prepares her bread in summer, gathers her food in harvest. How long will you lie there, O sluggard? When will you arise from your sleep, a little slumber, and a little folding of the hands to rest, and poverty will come upon you like a robber, and want like an armed man. That's great stuff. That is very true. So get to work, idiot. Starting in chapter 10, a whole bunch of individual bits and pieces. 10:11. The mouth of the righteous is a fountain of life, but the mouth of the wicked conceals violence. You can tell an awful lot about people by the way they talk, by the way they interact with one another. Verse 12, hatred stirs up strife, but love covers all offenses. Okay, you could tell the difference. Okay, let's 12:1. Whoever loves discipline loves knowledge, but he who hates reproof is stupid. I love the bluntness of the Proverbs. The one who wants to grow in knowledge loves discipline. I love it when students of mine are willing to be corrected. I'm teaching a young man Hebrew, and I'm enjoying this very much. Teaching Hebrew is a pleasure for me. It's great fun. And this young man is not merely willing to be corrected; he's asking for correction. He's working on his pronunciation, and he knows he's not pronouncing things correctly, but he doesn't know how to fix it. So he's come to me to ask for help with his pronunciation. Duh, I'm happy to teach because he's willing to listen. Some students are not. They insist on doing it their own way. 11:22. This is, sorry, ladies, but here's one. Like a gold ring in a pig's snout is a beautiful woman without discretion. Modern movie stars tend to be pretty much that way. I suppose there are a few of them that aren't. 13:18. Poverty and disgrace come to him who ignores instruction, but whoever heeds reproof is honored. There's a great deal going on there. Verse 14:34. Righteousness exalts a nation, but sin is a reproach to any people. Righteousness and sin contrasted here. And what happens to the whole nation when we as individuals seek righteousness? As a whole, that lifts up the whole nation, including those who reject that righteousness. When sin is widespread and is celebrated in the popular media and in the culture as a whole, that brings down the whole nation. It is a reproach to a nation. Okay, that's the Proverbs. I want to go all the way to the end. I like Proverbs 31 so much that I'm going to read a big chunk of this. An excellent wife who can find. This is 31, beginning at verse 10. She is far more precious than jewels. The heart of her husband trusts in her, and he will have no lack of gain. She does him good and not harm all the days of her life. She seeks wool and flax and works with willing hands. She is like the ships of the merchant. She brings her food from afar. She rises while it is yet night and provides food for her household and portions for her maidens. She considers a field and buys it. This lady is not a mere housebound mouse. She's out doing real estate deals. She considers a field and buys it. With the fruit of her hands, she plants a vineyard. Plants a vineyard. Anybody have any idea how much work it is to plant and care for a vineyard? She dresses herself with strength and makes her arms strong. She perceives that her merchandise is profitable. Her lamp does not go out at night. She puts her hands to the distaff, and her hands hold the spindle. She opens her hands to the poor and reaches out her hands to the needy. She is not afraid of snow for her household, for all her household are clothed in scarlet. She makes bed coverings for herself. Her clothing is fine linen. Her husband is known in the gates when he sits among the elders of the land. She makes linen garments and sells them. She delivers sashes to the merchant. Strength and dignity are her clothing, and she laughs at the time to come. She opens her mouth with wisdom. The teaching of kindness is on her tongue. She looks well to the ways of her household and does not eat the bread of idleness. Her children rise up and call her blessed. Her husband also, and he praises her. Many women have done excellently, but you surpass them all. Charm is deceitful, and beauty is vain, but a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. That's cool. I like that. That's a good description, and it's foundational.
Okay,
Anyway, Proverbs
question.
is good stuff. Question. My wife is asking a question.
Is there one woman who really fulfills all of these?
Is there one woman who really fulfills
Or is it
all
possible?
of these? Probably there is nobody who quite does everyththing. The perfect woman most likely doesn't actually exist
Okay.
any more than the perfect man. But some women that I know come very, very close. Okay,
Good answer, good answer.
let's go on to the book of Ecclesiastes.
You passed.
Did I pass? Okay.
Yeah, good answer.
Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna share the screen just so you know where we're coming from. We're in the book of Ecclesiastes, and a little bit of background on Ecclesiastes. This is a tough little book. The title of the book. We'll look at the title here in just a minute. It's puzzling. There's a lot of statements in Ecclesiastes that seem to be unorthodox. There's a lot of pessimism in the book, and so some authors have questioned whether or not it belongs in the Bible. But it was apparently written by Solomon, and its place in the canon has always been secure. some modern critics have questioned it, but they never gain any traction. A correct interpretation of Ecclesiastes is going to harmonize the book with the rest of the Old Testament, and for that matter, with the New Testament. A bit of warning here. It's always a mistake to take individual verses out of context, anywhere in the Bible. In the book of Ecclesiastes, this can be disastrous. I'm not going to have time to go through all of the problems in the book of Ecclesiastes. Frankly, we don't have time for much of anything, but a warning: as you study Ecclesiastes on your own, one, find a commentary you really trust. If you're wondering about that and you're thinking about studying this book and teaching it, call me. I'll see to it that you have a commentary that will get you through it. But it's a difficult book. Don't assume that everything that you see in Ecclesiastes is gospel. Sometimes Solomon is playing what we call devil's advocate. He's throwing out ideas that he knows already are unwise and testing their wisdom. So it's an interesting book and a difficult book. The unity of the book of Ecclesiastes has been questioned by some scholars. I'm not going to go into a bunch of that. Some have pointed to an early pessimistic, probably unorthodox Kohelet as the first writer, and later on there's an orthodox redactor or editor who fixes everything. That doesn't hold water. We need to say that there is no evidence to support the theory. The unified tradition of Jewish scholarship, the whole textual tradition of the Old Testament, points to Solomon as the author and to the textual unity of the whole book. There's no evidence at all, not even marginal. And secondly, a careful analysis of the contents of Ecclesiastes make the hypothesis unnecessary. The book really is clear when you look at the whole sweep of the book that a single author has developed a powerful concept in a unique and creative way. So Solomon probably wrote the book. The first verse calls the author Kohelet, and we don't have a name Kohelet anywhere, but he calls himself Kohelet, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. Kohelet means something like the teacher or the preacher. It's translated into Greek as Ecclesiastes, which means one who stands in front of the church to teach, the preacher. Solomon is the one who had the wisdom, he had the contacts, he had the literary tradition to produce the work. His authorship is a serious possibility. Some major commentators have argued plausibly against Solomon's authorship on technical grounds. I don't think that's likely. It's not a big issue. Often when I'm teaching this book, I will call the author simply Kohelet, but I'm suggesting that that's a pseudonym for Solomon. The date of the book has to be around 930 BC, which is the death date for Solomon. It's probably late in Solomon's reign. It includes some interesting stuff, but 930 BC is about the time. The purpose of the book is bound up in this phrase. This is and this is where it becomes difficult. This is right in the beginning of the book. The words of the preacher, son of David, king in Jerusalem, verse 2. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. The word vanity, sometimes translate meaningless, is actually a Hebrew word, hebel. Hebel is a rather rare word. It means a vapor or a mist, something without a whole lot of structure. When a thing is repeated, as here, hebel, hebelim, meaningless of meaninglessnesses, or something like that. It's like holy of holies. It is a superlative. Um, what Solomon is beginning to do here is to suggest, as a hypothesis to be tested, that perhaps life is meaningless, that perhaps there is no purpose to life. There is no God, there is no meaning, there is no purpose. Everything is utterly chaotic. And if that is true, how can a man find something meaningful in this meaningless life of his? Okay, so that's what we're going to begin testing. And Solomon goes through the book testing a variety of hypotheses. Well, perhaps wisdom, lots and lots of education. This was the bottom of chapter 1. Let's go to school till we learn all that there is to know, and then perhaps it will be better. But Solomon discovered, having learned everything that he could, that it essentially doesn't help, because different teachers have different ideas, and how do you do this? So perhaps meaning can be found in life through self-indulgence. Let's go nuts. Let's have fun. Let's enjoy. Eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die, which, by the way, is a passage found in Ecclesiastes. Let's just have a blast, and that'll be fun. And Solomon discovers that that is not meaningful. He even discovers that an attempt to live extremely wisely is not meaningful. Well, then where is it? Maybe hard work. Maybe let's go to work and make a whole bunch of money. It doesn't work. And ultimately, he discovers that there seems to be no meaning under the sun. There's a contrast that Solomon provides here. Let's see if I can undo this. I'm going to stop this share, and I'm going to get the other thing to share. Maybe I will. And sometimes this is hard to do. Okay. Solomon uses a phrase. Now, here is the sun. There it is, shining in the sky. And he uses the phrase, under the sun. Talks about man's life under the sun. And we'll see that phrase recurring many times in the Bible, or many times in Ecclesiastes. What under the sun means is without God. Let's start with an atheistic philosophy. Let's assume there is no God. Let's see what life is like under the sun. So in contrast to that, we can suggest an over the sun philosophy. The over the sun philosophy includes God in the equation. Matter of fact, God underlies all of the truth in the world. If, in fact, Solomon wrote also the book of Proverbs, and Solomon said, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, then the book of Ecclesiastes makes perfectly good sense. But what we're going to find in Ecclesiastes is a contrast, a consistent contrast between an over the sun point of view with an under the sun point of view, a God-centered point of view contrasted with an atheistic point of view. And here are the two different poles. Those who say there is no God and those who say God is the center of meaning for all that is. Okay, I'm going to make this go away, maybe. Stop that one and set us back up again here. Actually, I don't need to. Chapter 3, the first few verses, very famous. Here's a bit of over the sun wisdom. Interesting how Solomon goes back and forth with these things. For everything there is a season and a time for every matter under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant, a time to pluck up what is planted, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to break down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn, a time to dance, a time to cast away stones, a time to gather stones together, a time to embrace, a time to refrain from embracing, a time to seek, a time to lose, a time to keep, and a time to cast away, a time to tear and a time to sow, a time to keep silence and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. Solomon is arguing for the practicality of a God-centered wisdom. We look at life, and there is a moderate middle ground. We don't always have to be going off to war. We don't always have to be healing. Sometimes there's a time to hurt. We don't always have to be embracing one another. Sometimes it's best to refrain. It's a very practical passage. As we get through this book, I have to go quickly. I would like to do the whole book, but we're not going to have time. Remember your Creator, chapter 12. This is a summary of everything that Solomon is studying. Remember your Creator in the days of your youth, before the evil days come and the years draw near, of which you will say, I have no pleasure in them. So, young man, young woman, while you're young, serve God with the strength of your youth. Choose wisdom while you're still young enough to enjoy life. Over in chapter 11, a passage that I really love. Cast your bread upon the waters, for you will find it after many days. Taken out of context, that doesn't mean anything. But when we look at the larger passage, give a portion to 7 or even to 8, for you know not what disaster may happen in the earth. If the clouds are full of rain, they empty themselves on the earth. If the tree falls to the south or to the north, in the place where the tree falls, there it will lie. He who observes the wind will not sow. He who regards the clouds will not reap. Verse 6, in the morning sow your seed, and at evening withhold not your hand, for you do not know which will prosper, this or that, or whether both alike will be good. You don't know what's going to happen, so do the right thing. Work hard, live a wise life, try things, cast your bread in the water. What goes around comes around. And if you do the right thing with everyone that you come in contact with, eventually the blessing will come back to bite you. It's all good in the end if we begin with the fear of God. The end of the book. Besides being wise, Kohelet also taught the people knowledge. This is verse 9. Weighing and studying and arranging many proverbs with great care, the preacher sought to find words of delight, and uprightly he wrote the words of truth. The words of the wise are like goads. Now, a goad is short for ox goad. It's a long stick, about 2 meters long, with a point at one end, tipped in iron usually, and a shovel at the other, as for working around an ox. When an ox, which is a big, stupid animal, needs to be convinced that he should move, the farmer will poke him with an ox goad. Solomon says the words of the wise are like ox goads. Sometimes when we're listening to the wise teach, the truth hurts. And that's a good thing. We should thank God for that. The words of the wise are like like goads. And the masters of these collections are like firmly fixed nails, given by one shepherd. Okay. The firmly driven nail, the well-driven nail, is the image of the one who has mastered the collections of the words of the wise. And ultimately, we can take this as the mastering of the words of Scripture. The Bible is the collected words of what God deems to be universally true. And mastering this collection is a lifelong project. I don't think I will ever get done, short of heaven. Solomon says, when you are a master of these things, it's because you have submitted to the authority of older and wiser teachers still, who have driven you like a well-driven nail. If you've ever looked at a nail that's been driven into a block of wood, you have an understanding of what that is. The nice thing about a really well-driven nail is it's very hard to pull out. A good education will serve through all of life. I'm going to very, very quickly run through this little book of the Song of Solomon, and I'm not going to do justice to it. I'm really not. Let's see here what I've got. I need to be sharing the screen. So, bingo. Here we go. This is a picture I took in Haifa in Israel many long years ago. Actually, it's in Akko, the north side of Haifa Bay. Here's a couple of kids who decided that for their wedding, they wanted something completely unusual. So they went out on this small boat in the middle of Haifa Bay on a windy day with big waves. And if you look carefully at that girl, it looks to me like she's about to barf. But that's all right. They're having an adventure, and everybody should. Okay, the Song of Solomon is a little book that bothers a lot of people. There are a couple of issues with the Song of Solomon. One, the book exists, and that bothers some people. If we were to find this little book all by itself on the street, detached from its biblical context, it would probably be viewed as a purely secular document. There are very few identifiable clues as to its ancient Jewish origins. There are few of the usual marks of biblical literature. There are no religious themes, no institutions, no practices. The temple isn't here. There's very little there. There's no reference to sin, to grace, to law, to salvation, to prayer. In fact, there are no indisputable references to God himself in the text. Now, I think there is one place where we do hear God talking, but that's my opinion. Not everybody likes that. The interpretation of this book is all over the ballpark. No book in the Bible has such a wide variety of interpretive approaches. The options are so broad that some have despaired. The medieval Jewish commentator Sa'adiya, he's got an Arabic name, but he's a Jewish scholar, said it's like a lock for which the key has been lost. And Kylan Delitzsch, Franz Delitzsch, a German conservative of 100 years ago, calls it the most obscure book in the Old Testament. And those ideas continue to the present day. There are 4 basic approaches to interpreting the book. If you read the commentaries, and I don't recommend that you go off and buy 50 different commentaries on the Song of Solomon, but if you did, you'd find 50 different approaches because nobody agrees on this. The 4 basic approaches are, first of all, allegorical. This is the oldest approach to the book. As you read the book, it seems to be a story about the lover and the beloved. There seem to be some friends operating like a chorus, but it's not a drama. It just doesn't work that way. And you've got the lover and the beloved, the boy character, the girl character, and it's obvious they fall in love, they get married, they enjoy their lives together until they have their first big argument, and then they make up and live happily ever after. It's a married couple enjoying life and struggling with their marriage. That's what the book is, and when we look at that, we have to decide how are we going to take this. The ancient Jews began interpreting this allegorically. Jewish commentators argue that the lover is Yahweh, God, and the beloved is Israel. So this is a story of the love between Yahweh and Israel. Once the church came on the scene, the church sees Christ as the bridegroom and the church as the bride. So obviously the Song of Solomon is about Christ and the church. Roman Catholicism has often pictured God as the bridegroom and the Virgin Mary as the bride. The problem with the allegorical approach is threefold. First of all, there's no indication in the text that the author was trying to do allegory. It doesn't start out once upon a time. It doesn't tell us a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, there were these 2 wonderful characters who are actually Christ in the church. It doesn't tell us anything like that. Normally, there's some clue when the Bible is doing allegory. Allegory is quite rare in the Bible. And every place that it clearly exists, there are obvious signs. There's none here. Secondly, the people and the places that are mentioned seem to be drawn from reality, not from fiction. 200 years ago in Puritan England, a fellow by the name of, oh boy, who wrote Pilgrim's Progress?
Forget. They can tell you.
Yeah, somebody probably knows. But anyway, Pilgrim's Progress. A lot of people like that book, and it's an allegory, and it's got all kinds of places that don't exist, like the Slough of Despond. Okay, what is that? Well, it's obviously
John Bunyan.
John Bunyan. Yeah, of course. I knew that.
I know, me too.
I hate it when I forget things like that. So John Bunyan and Pilgrim's Progress. You've got Pilgrim, who is the Christian. You've got various other characters who have names that tell us what their part is to play. It's an allegory. It never happened. It isn't about any place. The Song of Solomon has Solomon and the Shunammite bride. It appears to be a description of Solomon's marriage to a young woman, what we call the Shunammite. Um, that gives us all kinds of interesting problems. As we know, Solomon had lots of wives and concubines, diplomatic wives, and the rest of it. So who is this Shunammite? Is this the wife of his youth? What's the difference between the wife of your youth and all of the diplomatic wives? I'm not sure I entirely get it. And yet, the allegorical approach doesn't seem to work here. Thirdly, in allegorical interpretation, there are no limits to what we do with the storyline. It's just whatever you can imagine, and if you can imagine it, it is probably in a commentary somewhere. So I would say that if we go with the second view, the natural view, that we're more likely to be close. The natural view, which sees in the song primarily the story of two people in love, has also had its proponents all through the history of interpretation. As you read the old commentators, you'll find some interpreters who just got tired of the endless image building of the allegorists. Up until fairly modern era, like the last 100 years or so, most of those commentators paid dearly for their error. Ever since the 18th century, and the most common position today is to see the book as historical, as natural, but with certain elements of typology. So human love and marriage certainly is typical of the relationship of God to Israel or of Christ to the church. We can agree with that. But the primary focus of the book is the natural human love of these two. Some have called it a drama. Again, this Franz Delitzsch liked this. The problem with that is that in the ancient Near East, there was nothing that we could call drama. The critics see this as a cultic thing, a pagan cultic thing with a Canaanite fertility goddess and fertility god and all of the mythology. I reject that out of hand. So the most logical approaches to this book are either the natural or the dramatic. I take the natural view on all of the Song of Solomon. And I think these are two real people. We're meant to enjoy them. The history of the misunderstanding goes way back. The early church developed a bad attitude toward marriage. 325 AD, the Council of Nicaea proposed that all priests should leave their wives. And the proposal wasn't enacted, but the principles were accepted. And by the end of the 4th century, the Pope, Syracuse by name, had commanded that all the priests live unmarried lives. By the time of Augustine, around 410 AD, celibacy was the norm. The idea was that marriage is a condescension to sin. Because we are sinful people, it's impossible to enjoy the marriage relationship without lusting or feeling sinful in some way. Therefore, marriage is necessary for procreation, but it's not quite good enough for the priesthood. And so celibacy in the priesthood and amongst the monks and nuns goes way, way back. There's a philosophical basis for this that is incorrect. It goes all the way back to Gnosticism. A simple, casual study of scripture ought to take care of this idea. It's clear in Genesis that God designed the relationship of man and wife as a blessing, and that blessing continues through the ages. All of the patriarchs were married. All of the kings of Israel were married. All of the prophets that we know of except Jeremiah were married. The high priest was expected to be married since his office was hereditary. He had to have children. The New Testament continues the tradition. Jesus wasn't married, but his disciples usually were. The apostles were married men. Most of them didn't have wives by the time they went out in their ministries, but they all seem to have been married men at one time or another. The only New Testament exception seems to be in 1 Corinthians 7. And I'm going to have to let some other interpreter get you through that. There's nothing particularly holy about celibacy or an unmarried life. There's nothing particularly evil about it either. People who never marry are not bad people, but that's not the key to holiness. The scripture is obviously generally widely supportive of the institution, the relationship of marriage. And the Song of Solomon simply celebrates marriage. And so I would say that the purpose and the message of the Song of Solomon is to celebrate human love for love's sake. I'm not going to read through the whole book, but I want to introduce you to some little bits. The end of chapter 2, we see the one of the central statements of the book. My beloved is mine, and I am his. Ani ladodi, vadodi li in Hebrew. I am my beloved's, my beloved is mine. I belong to him, he belongs to me. That is the essence of human love. When we are ready to face one another and promise, all that I am, I give to you. All that I will ever become is yours. I accept the gift of yourself. And we belong to one another for a lifetime. The act of marriage is a promise of living a lifetime together for one another. Not in order that I may get, but in order that I may give. And in giving, we receive. The book is all about that. The wedding is, the book can be thought of as a kind of a sequence of snapshots. I'm not going to show you all the snapshots. Some have seen 23 or 25 snapshots through the whole album of this book. But the wedding is described in some detail in chapter 3, with the bride dreaming about her wedding day. Oh, on her bed by night I sought him whom my soul loves, and it goes on. In chapter 6, what is that coming up from the dark, from the wilderness, like columns of smoke, perfumed with myrrh and frankincense, with all the fragrant powders of the merchants? Behold, it is the litter of Solomon. And so here comes the marriage procession, and instead of the bride coming, it's the groom coming. This is actually carried on in modern Jewish tradition, where the groom often will arrive with pomp and circumstance wherever the marriage is being held, and the bride and her family are nearby. So the wedding happens in the bride's village. It's kind of a cool thing. The admiration of Solomon for his bride is in chapter 4. This is usually taken to be a description of the wedding night, as they are, for the first time, enjoying one another. 5:1 is actually the end of 4 and the beginning of 5. Let my beloved come to his garden and eat its choicest fruit. So the garden illustration. What are they talking about? Say, Mom, what is that about a garden? I came to my garden, my sister, my bride. I gathered my myrrh and with my spice. I ate my honeycomb with my honey. I drank my wine with my milk. Okay, whole lot of symbolism going on there, and married people will understand, and their children will one day figure it out. And this is the main event of the wedding night. Then the response to that, the end of verse 1, eat, friends, drink, and be drunk with love. This is the observation of a third party from the outside looking on. Now, who was with them there in the marriage chamber? Well, it's the bride, the bridegroom, and the friends are nowhere around. They are partying. The wedding party goes on, and all of the food is out on the tables, and that's what they're up to. And they would no more come in and interrupt than die. That just wouldn't happen. So who's watching? Well, this, I believe, 5:1, is God's words. This is God looking down. Enjoy. This is what marriage is about. Enjoy one another. In chapter 6, I am my beloved's and my beloved is mine, 6:3. As we get down to the end of the book, 8 and verse 6, this is the beloved speaking of Solomon. She says, looking back to a time when things were kind of hard, when they've had their first big argument, and now they've made up. Set me as a seal upon your heart, as a seal upon your arm, for love is as strong as death. Jealousy is fierce as the grave. Its flashes are flashes of fire, the very flame of the Lord. Many waters cannot quench love, neither can floods drown it. I'm going to stop the share. Yeah. Neither can floods drown it. If a man offered for love all the wealth of his house, it would be utterly despised. But I want you to remember from this is that love is a gift that we give one another. Love can't be demanded. It can't be purchased. There is no bribery. Love is a gift I give to another person without cost, without expectation. I look for what is best for someone else. And in the giving, I receive. There is a powerful emotion involved. But love is primarily a decision that we make to do what is best for another person. In marriage, the intention is a lifetime, joined together through thick and thin, better or worse, sickness and health, rich and poor, the whole panoply of life together. And we give ourselves to one another for a lifetime. That's the message of the Song of Solomon. I've enjoyed that. When we get back together on Wednesday, we're going to go back into the Kings, and we'll start in 1 Kings, and we're going to run really quickly through a whole lot of history that takes us up to the time of the first prophets of Israel. We'll start on the prophets next Monday, I hope. We'll see how much we can get through on Wednesday, but we'll see you on Wednesday. I'm going to make it all possible for everybody to hear everybody. Okay, now we're all unmuted. Now we can talk. Hi there.
Hey.
Get this out of the way. Love you guys. I've gone a little long today, but the next couple are likely to be long ones. Hey, I see Joel. And there's Don. I'm going to get the whole group out. There we go. There's Eddie. Oh, there's Pastor Ray. Oh, good to see you, my friend. All right, guys.
Good night.
Good night, all.
Thank you, Dr. John.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so
Bye,
much.
Donna, sister.
It's
Bye, Don.
late there. Thank you for staying. Bye-bye.